What's your favourite tax? So asked Victoria's Treasurer to a group of developers. And so it seems that Jim Chalmers is going to ask to the rest of Australia. Which tax or taxes do you want to see increase? Because Jim Chalmers looks like he is set to do so with his productivity roundtable and his investigation into so-called reforms into Australia's tax system. And let's face it, whenever people are talking about reforms, that should really be in air quotes, because it really just means a tax hike. Whether it's Allegra Spender talking about it, or Jim Chalmers, or really, let's face it, anyone else, it just means tax hikes. Whether it's the GST being increased, or potential land taxes coming in, or potentially property taxes increasing, or really anything else, it just looks like there's a plan to hike taxes. On top of Jim Chalmers' plan to increase superannuation taxes, effectively amounting to a tax grab and a tax seizure over superannuation assets. In essence, with the Productivity Roundtable, Jim Chalmers is looking for an excuse to spend more money and tax us more to try to fund it. It seems there's no actual appetite to reduce wasteful spending, just an appetite to spend more money to try to get votes and then tax people after the fact to try to pay for it, and to lie about those taxes in so doing. Now, I've already talked ad nauseum about Jim Chalmers' superannuation tax grab, the plan to introduce that tax on unrealised gains in superannuation funds, which in essence amounts to a seizure of assets. Because when those assets go up in value, well, the government is going to come for a slice of that increase, even if you haven't sold them, and even if they happen to be unlisted and therefore unable to be sold, and even if they subsequently decrease in value. They're going to come for their pound of flesh regardless. And it looks like that is set to pass the Senate, with Labor and the Greens controlling the Senate. Although there is a petition circulating to try to stop it, so we'll include a link to that in the description below. But it seems that Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese are not satisfied with seizing people's superannuation funds. They're not satisfied with undermining confidence in retirement savings. They want to find yet more ways to slug people, which is underscoring a lot of the rhetoric circling around at the moment. Jim Chalmers, for example, said that the government is, quote, not changing the policies we took to the election, and they are looking for new ideas. But where have we heard that before, when they said they had no plans to change taxes on superannuation and no plans to reverse stage 3 tax cuts? But then, lo and behold, they did both of those things, and then used weasel words such as fairness to try to paper over it. Basically, the government lied, they increased taxes, and then they expected you to be thankful for it. Jim Chalmers also says, we're looking for not opportunities to go back on the things we've already got a mandate for, we're looking for new ideas. And here, I want to take issue with the idea of them having a mandate. They got 34% of the primary vote and 54% of two-party preferred. So even on two-party preferred, 46% of Australians didn't want the government. That is not a mandate. That's a bare majority. And if he uses that to steamroll over 46% of Australians, that's what we would call a tyranny of the majority. Basically, a bare majority gets to steamroll over everyone. Hopefully, when the government loses power, then the now opposition will just steamroll over the people who wanted those so-called reforms and reverse them, but let's face it, they seem so dysfunctional they quite possibly won't. Jim Chalmers apparently sees tax reform not only as a vehicle for more productivity, but also for budget sustainability and economic resilience in the face of global volatility. Basically, he's looking for ways to increase taxes so he can fund all of the spending he's baked into the budget, including NDIS that is growing at 3 times the rate of the economy. But it's not just Jim Chalmers using weasel words, it's Allegra Spender. Now, as I've talked about in prior videos, I'm not a fan of Allegra Spender, and I think her tax green paper is a monumental waste of space, and it's just a recipe for hiking taxes while papering over it with the veneer of reform. She said that she looks forward to playing a positive role in any future legislation, and tax is the government's critical lever on productivity, sustainability, intergenerational equity, eye roll, and energy transition. It affects every aspect of how we live, work, save, and invest. But it seems that Allegra Spender could very well increase taxes on savings and investments, because buried in her tax green paper is a possibility of increasing capital gains tax, which is utterly moronic because Australia's capital gains tax is already absurdly high, capping out at 47.5%, which compares to 0% in New Zealand, 0% in Singapore, 0% in Dubai, 0% in Kuwait. Basically, Australia is not competitive and capital is fleeing to the countries that want the capital, such as, well, ironically enough, New Zealand, which is often put up as a so-called progressive poster child. Australia has even higher taxes on investment than does New Zealand, which I think is utterly absurd. But it's something that Jim Chalmers and Allegra Spender seem to not realise. This is very much clear from Jim Chalmers' plan to tax unrealised gains in super, and not only tax them, but tax them at 30%, which I'll note is well above the 0% that exists in New Zealand. Jim Chalmers has also flagged yet more government spending and more imposts, saying that the global transition to net zero will impact the huge revenues the budget receives from resources. And he's talked up the need for a, quote, evolution of the tax system, including a new levy on electric cars. How about we just dig up the resources and sell them in order to get the royalties and the corporate tax that would so ensue? It seems that Jim Chalmers is brain dead. He wants to eviscerate major industries that contribute tons of tax revenue. And I'll note they do contribute tons of tax revenue in the form of mining royalties, in the form of corporate tax, in the form of payroll tax, in the form of GST, and also, like I've said, in the form of that corporate tax, which they do indeed pay, despite misleading information saying that they do not. In essence, they're trying to wipe out some of our major industries, and then they're wondering what's going to happen to the budget. It doesn't take a genius to realize that will create a budget black hole. And we're already facing massive taxes. Why don't they just encourage industry so that we can encourage more growth? And by encouraging more growth, we encourage greater tax revenue overall, which means the government can take a smaller percentage slice of a growing pie. Rather, it appears that Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese want the government to take a larger slice, so a larger proportion or a larger percentage of a stagnant or potentially shrinking pie, because it appears like they're trying to get rid of some of our major resource sectors. He's urged stakeholders in the media to work constructively to, quote, reset and renew the national reform conversation. Basically, if you don't work with us, you're being obstructionist and you're not being constructive. To which I would say, if the ideas are trash, then you shouldn't support them. Because you shouldn't be constructive and support ideas that are just going to make life worse. You should oppose those, and you should obstruct them. So when the opposition is saying no to a lot of the government's so-called reforms, I think that's actually a good thing. They should be saying no. They shouldn't just be lying down and letting the government pursue all manner of stupid policies, such as it appears they're intending to do here. It appears that at this productivity roundtable, the opposition hasn't necessarily even been invited, at least at the moment. And the opposition has shot back, saying that it's akin to, quote, the arsonist playing the role of the firefighter. Or another analogy that's often talked about is when someone breaks your leg and then hands you a crutch and expects you to thank them for it. And that's basically what Jim Chalmers is doing. He's breaking all of our legs by having incredibly high taxes, and then he's handing some government handouts and expecting us to be thankful for it. He's making us all indigent. He's making us indentured servants to the government. And he's hoping that when we're all reliant on government handouts, the party that offers the most handouts will just get re-elected. But of course the problem is the money has to come from somewhere, and the money is going to leave. Because it appears that the government treats that money with contempt, and therefore people just leave. And it's easier now than ever to be able to do so. Whether it's people shifting their businesses offshore or people leaving offshore. It's now easier than ever to do so. But Jim Chalmers wants to make the situation worse. That probably should not surprise us from the ALP, but it looks like they're trying to steamroll over everyone and then bully everyone who doesn't just lie down and take it. Now, unfortunately, we're slightly stuck with them for the next couple of years. But you can sign the petition to try to defeat the superannuation tax grab using the petition below. Hopefully, we can get rid of it. And hopefully it ends up getting blocked in the Senate, because let's face it, the Labour Party could easily implode given the sheer number of people they have, so it's not insurmountable to try to get rid of it. And given how absurd the policy is, it just takes one senator balking at it for it to fail. And hopefully it does. But anyway, you can let me know your thoughts about this so-called reform agenda in the comments below. Do you think it is genuine reform, or do you think it's just an excuse to milk us for more money? What do you think?